The rancher ordered a fragile mail-order bride, and a woman who could wrestle cattle stepped off. Caleb Turner had spent most of his adult life surrounded by wide open land, the kind of land that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. His ranch sat in a remote valley, far away from any town or city, where the wind whispered through the tall grass and the sun rose over the hills like a quiet promise every morning. It was a place of hard work and long days. The ranch was all he had ever known, and over the years it had shaped him. His hands were calloused from years of mending fences, carrying feed, and guiding stubborn cattle. His face was tanned and lined, a map of decades spent outdoors, and his eyes had the calm, steady look of a man who had learned to survive on his own. Life on the ranch was lonely, but Caleb had never minded being alone. In fact, he had often said to himself that the quiet and isolation were the only companions he truly needed. Still, after 10 years of living in solitude, there was a part of him that longed for something different. It was not love exactly, not the kind of love that made hearts race or words stumble. It was something quieter, something gentler. He wanted someone to share the simple things with, someone who could bring a soft voice into the empty rooms of his home, someone who could smile at the sunset without needing much else, someone who could sit beside him in the evenings with a sense of calm and warmth. The idea had come to him one winter evening as he sat in his kitchen, the fire crackling in the stove, and a cup of strong coffee warming his hands. He thought about all the letters he had exchanged over the years with people from town, the neighbors he rarely saw, the fleeting conversations at the market miles away. And then, almost as if it were a quiet suggestion from the wind itself, he considered the idea of a mail-order bride. It was an old-fashioned idea, yes, and one that sounded strange to some, but Caleb was not concerned with what others thought. He needed someone reliable, someone steady, someone gentle, and in a world full of unpredictability, this seemed like a way to find her. He sent letters to several women, each one polite, careful, and full of basic questions about their lives, their habits, and their hopes. He imagined them in his mind as he wrote. A delicate woman with soft hands, someone who would not mind the long days of quiet, someone who would appreciate the simplicity of his life without asking for more than he could give. When Alina Whitfield's letter arrived, Caleb had been struck by her neat handwriting and the simplicity of her words. She spoke of her love for animals, her willingness to work hard, and her hope for a steady, quiet life. There was nothing extravagant, nothing boastful, nothing that suggested strength or independence beyond what was expected. Just a polite, well-written letter. He pictured her carefully. She would step off the train, clutching her small bag of belongings, smiling softly at him, perhaps looking around with a little wonder at the vastness of the land. She would need his guidance, his protection, and she would quietly appreciate the life he could offer. He imagined the house they would share, the meals they would cook together, and the evenings by the fire. This was the vision that had kept him thinking about her for weeks, that had made his lonely home seem suddenly full with the possibility of companionship. As the day of her arrival approached, Caleb prepared the ranch. He cleaned the rooms, making sure everything was in order. He polished the wooden floors, laid out fresh linens, and made sure there was food stored and ready. Every corner of the house seemed to hum with quiet anticipation, the walls almost holding their breath as if they, too, expected her. Outside, the pens were tidy, the animals fed, and the fields checked for hazards. The horses were brushed and saddled, ready for any task that might come their way. Caleb wanted everything to be perfect, not for himself, but for her. He wanted her first impression to be of order, of care, of a life that was steady and dependable. The night before she arrived, Caleb could hardly sleep. He went outside to walk the fence lines, the chill of the winter air biting at his cheeks. He looked over the hills, the moon casting long shadows across the snow-dusted fields. His mind wandered, imagining the train pulling into the small station the next morning, imagining the figure that would step off into his world. He repeated to himself the qualities he hoped for in her: gentle, quiet, appreciative, kind. And he told himself that she would fit in perfectly. Morning came cold and crisp. The sun rose over the hills with a golden glow, painting the fields in shades of yellow and green. Caleb stood on the edge of the station platform, hat low over his brow, watching the train as it approached. His heart beat a little faster with anticipation, and for a moment he allowed himself to hope that this quiet life he had imagined could become a reality. He saw passengers stepping down, families reuniting, friends laughing, and then the moment came, the train doors opened and she stepped out. Caleb expected delicacy, but instead, what he saw made him pause. The woman who stepped onto the platform was not small or fragile. She was tall, strong, confident. She carried two heavy trunks, one in each hand, without faltering, and moved with a determined purpose that made heads turn. Her boots hit the ground firmly, kicking up dust, and her eyes scanned the area with alertness. She looked around, taking in the wide open land with a kind of certainty that made Caleb feel uncertain. This was not the delicate, quiet companion he had imagined. Before Caleb could speak, a sudden commotion caught his attention. A stray steer, having slipped through a gate, charged across the platform, causing passengers to scatter. Panic spread quickly, but Alina did not flinch. In a fluid motion, she dropped one of her trunks, ran toward the animal, and with surprising strength, grabbed the rope trailing from its halter. She planted her boots firmly and wrestled the steer into a safer direction, her voice calm but commanding. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Caleb felt something shift inside him. He had imagined a woman who needed him, who would be timid and thankful. Instead, this woman was independent, capable, and unafraid. His carefully constructed expectations crumbled as he watched her handle the situation with skill and courage. For the first time in years, Caleb felt a spark of awe and a hint of fear. She was not what he had ordered, and yet, somehow, she had already made an impression stronger than any letter could have. As the crowd began to disperse, Caleb approached her cautiously. "I'm Caleb Turner," he said, unsure of how to respond to someone who had just upended every expectation he had held. Alina turned, her eyes meeting his, steady and unyielding, and gave a small nod. "Alina Whitfield," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's good to meet you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet but not awkward. Caleb found himself watching her closely, noticing the ease with which she handled the reins, the way she balanced herself on the horse, the confidence in her posture. He realized that the quiet life he had imagined might need to be reimagined entirely. Perhaps he would not be the protector he had envisioned. Perhaps, in truth, he would be the one learning from her. By the time they reached the ranch, Caleb understood that his expectations had been completely wrong. He had imagined a fragile, delicate companion, someone who would need him. What he had instead was a woman who could stand on her own, who could face challenges with strength and skill, and who might very well change the way he thought about life, work, and even companionship itself. As Alina stepped off her horse and looked around the ranch, Caleb felt a mixture of admiration, anxiety, and curiosity. The house, the fields, the fences, they were all the same as before, but everything felt different. With her presence, the ranch had shifted. He realized that life, much like the wide open land surrounding them, was unpredictable. And sometimes, the surprises were exactly what a person needed, even if they never knew it. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb found himself listening more than speaking. Alina spoke of her past, her experiences on other farms, her love for animals, and her desire to work hard. She did not speak of needing protection. She spoke of partnership. And for the first time in many years, Caleb began to see a future he had never imagined, a future that was wide open, full of challenges, and full of possibilities that he had not even considered. The quiet night wrapped around the ranch like a soft blanket. Outside, the stars shone bright, endless and unyielding. Inside, Caleb realized that the life he had imagined was only the beginning. The woman who had stepped off the train had brought with her more than strength. She had brought change. And with it, a chance at something new, something neither fragile nor delicate, but strong, resilient, and entirely alive. The next morning, the ranch woke to a quiet that felt heavier than usual, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath and was waiting. Caleb rose early, as he always did, but this morning he moved slower than usual. Alina was already up, moving around the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Her movements were confident and sure, but there was a gentleness to the way she poured coffee and arranged the plates that surprised Caleb. She seemed to belong here, even though she had just arrived, and that thought both excited and unsettled him. He watched her from the doorway, noticing small details he had not expected. The way her fingers worked quickly, efficiently. The way her eyes scanned the room, noticing things that needed attention. The way she moved with a mix of strength and care that he had never seen in anyone. Caleb had imagined a fragile companion, delicate and dependent, someone he could guide and protect. Alina was nothing like that. She was the opposite. She was capable, independent, and unafraid to step into tasks without hesitation. After breakfast, Caleb showed her around the ranch. The fences, the barns, the paddocks, and the pastures stretched as far as the eye could see. He talked about the cattle, the horses, and the routines that kept the ranch running. Alina listened carefully, nodding and asking questions. Her questions were practical, insightful, and sometimes even challenging. She asked about feed schedules, about the quality of the water in the troughs, about the fences that had been patched many times over. Caleb felt a flicker of surprise each time she asked something he hadn't thought about. She was not just observing, she was thinking, planning, analyzing. When they reached the cattle pens, a few of the ranch hands were already working with the animals. Alina did not hesitate. She rolled up her sleeves, tied her hair back, and walked straight into the pen. Caleb followed, feeling both nervous and impressed. The men paused, looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some whispered among themselves, wondering how long it would take for her to tire. Some, more quietly, seemed to sense that she was different. One of the younger steers had gotten its head stuck between two fence rails. It struggled, thrashing, trying to free itself. The men hesitated, unsure how to approach it without making the situation worse. Alina, without hesitation, stepped forward. She spoke softly to the animal, her voice calm and firm, reaching out with steady hands. Slowly, she guided the steer's head free, using both strength and patience. The men watched, astonished. Caleb, too, felt a surge of pride and relief. She had handled it perfectly, with skill and care. As the day went on, Alina proved herself in ways Caleb had not anticipated. She helped mend broken fences, her hands strong and precise. She cleaned the barn, organized the feed storage, and even managed to coax a stubborn horse into a calm walk. She worked with the ranch hands, not above them, not as a superior, but as someone willing to do what needed to be done. Her presence seemed to lift the atmosphere on the ranch. Even the animals responded differently, calmer, more cooperative. Caleb found himself observing her more than he spoke. He noticed how she handled challenges without frustration, how she maintained her composure when things went wrong, and how she seemed to anticipate problems before they even happened. He began to realize that Alina was not just a capable worker. She was a natural problem solver. She had an intuition about the land, the animals, and the work that he had spent years developing himself. Despite his admiration, Caleb felt a twinge of discomfort. He had imagined a different kind of relationship, one where he was the guide, the protector, the authority. Alina challenged that. She questioned his decisions sometimes, offered alternatives, and carried out tasks in her own way. At first, he bristled at it, feeling a quiet irritation. But slowly, he began to understand that her input made the ranch run smoother. He could see the benefits of having someone so capable and thoughtful beside him. By mid-afternoon, they were called to the fields. A small group of cattle had wandered too close to the creek, and some were beginning to cross unstable ground. Caleb prepared to lead the effort, but Alina took initiative. She mounted a horse, her posture confident and commanding, and rode ahead. Caleb followed, amazed at how quickly she adapted to the rhythm of ranch work. The animals responded to her calm authority. Where he had imagined needing to push and pull, she simply guided and directed. They spent hours in the field, rounding up the scattered cattle and leading them back to safety. Alina worked tirelessly, her energy seemingly endless. Caleb noticed the ease with which she moved, the way she anticipated the cattle's movements, and the way she adjusted her strategy as the situation changed. It was unlike anything he had expected. This was not the delicate, dependent woman he had imagined. This was a partner, an equal, a force in her own right. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they returned to the ranch. Alina dismounted, brushing off the dirt and sweat from her clothes. Caleb could see the fatigue in her face, but also a quiet satisfaction. She had accomplished the tasks of the day with skill and determination, and yet there was no boastfulness, no need for recognition. She had simply done what needed to be done. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the hills, Caleb found himself speaking more than he had intended. "I didn't expect this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward the fields and the pens. Alina smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Expectations can be tricky," she said. "Sometimes what we think we want is not what we really need." Caleb considered her words, feeling the truth of them settle over him like the cool night air. The following days continued in a similar rhythm. Elinor learned the routines quickly, but she also introduced small improvements. She suggested new ways to organize the feed, better methods for tending to the animals, and ways to repair fences that would last longer. Caleb found himself listening more than arguing. Slowly, he realized that her ideas were not just good. They were better than what he had been doing on his own. She had brought fresh perspective and skill to the ranch, and it made the work lighter, more efficient, and even more rewarding. Even outside of work, Elinor's presence changed the ranch. She prepared meals that were hearty and nourishing, yet simple. She cleaned and organized with care, but never obsessively. She spoke to the animals with patience and affection, creating a calm atmosphere that even Caleb could feel. The house, once quiet and almost empty, now felt alive. The walls seemed to absorb her energy, the rooms seemed warmer, and the evening silence no longer felt lonely. Caleb began to notice small details about her that he had missed at first. The way she laughed quietly at little things, the way she handled challenges with grace, the way she treated the ranch hands with respect and fairness. These small moments added up, creating a sense of connection that Caleb had never anticipated. He had thought he was bringing someone into his life to need him, but Elinor was teaching him something else. Companionship could be about equality, about partnership, about mutual respect. One evening, after a particularly long day, Caleb and Elinor walked to the edge of the pasture. The sky was painted in twilight colors, the wind gentle after a day of work. Caleb felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He realized that life on the ranch, once a solitary struggle, had become a shared experience. Elinor's strength, her confidence, and her willingness to step into the work had changed everything. He no longer worried about her needing him. He began to think about how he could support her, how they could work together, and how the ranch could thrive with both of them contributing their skills. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Caleb felt gratitude for the unexpected. He had ordered a delicate, gentle companion, but life had delivered someone stronger, someone braver, someone who could stand beside him rather than behind him. And in that strength, he saw the possibility of a future richer than he had ever imagined. Elinor, too, looked at the stars, thinking quietly of the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived expecting a new home, a new chapter, but she had also found a place where her abilities mattered, where her strength was welcomed, and where she could make a real difference. The ranch was not just a plot of land. It was a living, breathing place that needed care, skill, and love. And she could provide all of those things, not as someone fragile, but as a woman capable of handling whatever challenges came her way. By the end of the week, Caleb and Elinor had settled into a rhythm. The mornings began with work in the fields, feeding and tending to animals, repairing fences, and preparing the ranch for the day. The afternoons were spent on more detailed tasks, teaching the ranch hands new techniques, checking the health of the animals, and managing supplies. Evenings were quiet but full, with shared meals and conversations about plans, ideas, and observations from the day. The house no longer felt empty, it felt like a home. Caleb realized that Elinor had brought more than strength and skill to the ranch. She had brought a new way of seeing the world, a new energy, and a sense of partnership that he had never experienced. He began to let go of his old expectations, understanding that life, work, and companionship were not about control or protection. They were about trust, respect, and shared effort. By the time the first week had passed, Caleb could not imagine the ranch without Elinor. She had stepped off the train with confidence, faced challenges without hesitation, and proven herself capable in every way. She had changed not only the work on the ranch, but also Caleb's understanding of what it meant to share a life with someone. He had expected a fragile companion, but what he had received was someone far stronger than he could have anticipated. The days on the ranch settled into a rhythm, but the rhythm was not without tension. Caleb had expected a delicate companion who would quietly follow his lead, someone who would accept his decisions without question. Instead, Elinor challenged him in subtle ways that made him pause. She questioned certain practices, suggested improvements, and sometimes did things her own way. At first, Caleb found this frustrating. His pride, built over years of running the ranch alone, bristled at the thought of being corrected or challenged, even by someone he admired. The first conflict came over a task that Caleb considered simple: One morning, he was preparing to repair a broken fence that bordered the northern pasture. He had done it countless times, and in his mind, he knew exactly how to handle it. Alina, observing the fence carefully, pointed out that the wood he had chosen was not strong enough to withstand the winter storms. Caleb felt a flush of irritation. He had chosen the wood himself. He had the experience. And yet, Alina's suggestion was practical and accurate. "I appreciate your concern," he said, trying to keep his tone calm, "but this will hold just fine." Alina shook her head gently, her eyes steady. "It might, but it won't last the season. We can fix it once, or we can do it right the first time." Her calm logic made it impossible for him to argue further. Caleb gritted his teeth, stepped aside, and watched as she replaced the weak boards with stronger, more durable wood. The fence looked better than he had expected. He had to admit silently that she was right. The ranch hands noticed the dynamic between Caleb and Alina. Some found it amusing, others were impressed. They had spent years respecting Caleb as the authority, but Alina's presence introduced a new balance. She earned their respect quickly, not by asserting dominance, but by demonstrating competence and fairness. She worked alongside them, correcting mistakes gently, praising efforts, and showing patience when animals misbehaved. Slowly, even the most skeptical ranch hands began to take her seriously. Caleb, however, struggled with a mix of pride and admiration. He admired her skill and strength, yet he found it difficult to surrender control. He had always been self-reliant, used to making every decision alone. Alina's presence challenged that independence, and it made him uncomfortable. But at the same time, he could not deny the improvements she brought to the ranch. The pens were stronger, the animals healthier, and the work smoother. He began to see that her input was not a threat, but a valuable addition. The first true test of their dynamic came when a group of calves became ill. Caleb had encountered sick calves before, but this time the symptoms were unusual. Alina observed them carefully, asking detailed questions about feeding habits, water quality, and environmental conditions. Caleb initially wanted to handle it himself, but Alina insisted on examining the calves thoroughly. Her knowledge surprised him. She had read about livestock care extensively and had experience from working on other farms. She suggested a treatment plan and organized the ranch hands to follow her instructions. Within days, the calves began to recover, much faster than Caleb could have managed alone. Watching her work, Caleb felt a mixture of relief, admiration, and something else, a growing respect that went deeper than simple acknowledgement. He began to understand that Alina was not trying to undermine him. She was offering her abilities to make the ranch stronger, healthier, and more secure. And slowly, he realized that accepting her help did not diminish him, it strengthened their partnership. Despite these successes, the clash of expectations did not disappear. There were moments when Caleb wanted to assert authority, moments when he expected Alina to defer to him, and moments when her confidence irritated him. She was not perfect, of course. She made mistakes, misjudged the behavior of an animal, or underestimated the difficulty of a task. But when she did, she corrected herself, learned, and adapted. Her resilience and willingness to face challenges without complaint impressed Caleb more than he cared to admit. Their personal interactions also reflected this push and pull. Alina was polite and considerate, yet she did not shy away from speaking her mind. She had opinions, preferences, and a clear sense of her own abilities. Caleb found himself listening more than he spoke, often surprised at how much he valued her perspective. Their conversations were no longer about who was right or wrong. They were about solutions, ideas, and improvements. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred while mending the roof of the barn. Caleb had begun the repairs, and Alina was assisting him. A loose plank shifted underfoot, sending Caleb stumbling. Alina reacted instantly, steadying him and preventing a serious fall. He felt a surge of gratitude mixed with embarrassment. "I should have checked that better," he admitted, brushing off the dust. "You're fine," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "We'll finish this together carefully." That simple phrase struck Caleb deeply. It was not a lecture, not a critique, but a statement of partnership. She was not undermining him, she was beside him. They worked together, step by step, until the repairs were complete. Caleb realized with quiet humility that collaboration did not weaken him, it made him stronger. The tension between expectation and reality continued in subtle ways. Caleb had imagined evenings of quiet conversation, gentle laughter, and a companion who relied on him for comfort. Instead, he found evenings filled with discussions about livestock care, farm management, and strategy. Elinor brought energy, insight, and determination into every moment. At first, this disrupted the vision he had held in his mind for so long, but gradually he began to appreciate it. The quiet life he had imagined was not enough. The ranch, the work, and life itself were dynamic, challenging, and ever-changing. Elinor's presence reflected that truth. Caleb also began to notice how Elinor's approach differed from his. Where he had relied on routines, she emphasized observation. Where he had acted based on experience, she suggested analysis and planning. Her methods were different, yet effective. He could see improvements everywhere. The cattle were healthier, the fences stronger, and the daily operations smoother. Even the ranch hands worked more efficiently, motivated by her confidence and example. Over time, Caleb realized that his pride, once a source of strength, had become a limitation. He had always believed that doing everything himself proved his capability. Now he saw that true strength could come from collaboration, from trusting someone else's judgment, and from embracing a shared responsibility. Elinor had shown him a new way to approach life and work. Their growing partnership was not without challenges, however. Elinor's independence and confidence sometimes clashed with Caleb's sense of authority. There were moments of friction when their ideas differed, when she acted on her own initiative, or when he attempted to assert control. But these moments were brief and constructive. They did not escalate into anger or resentment. Instead, they fostered understanding, negotiation, and mutual respect. One particular incident highlighted this dynamic. A severe storm had damaged part of the northern fence, allowing a small group of cattle to wander toward a steep ravine. Caleb immediately mounted his horse, intending to round them up alone. Elinor, however, rode alongside him, insisting on helping. At first, Caleb bristled, wanting to take responsibility himself, but he quickly realized that her skill and judgment were invaluable. Together, they guided the cattle back to safety, their movements coordinated, efficient, and precise. By the time the last animal was secured, Caleb felt a profound sense of respect and trust in her abilities. Beyond work, Elinor's influence extended into the daily life of the ranch. She prepared meals that were nourishing and practical, cleaned and organized with care, and maintained a calm, positive presence even during stressful times. Her energy, optimism, and thoughtfulness infused the ranch with life. Caleb found himself looking forward to the evenings when they could discuss ideas, reflect on the day's work, or simply sit together in quiet companionship. He began to recognize a subtle shift in himself as well. He no longer felt the need to control every aspect of the ranch. He began to rely on Elinor's judgment, value her perspective, and trust her instincts. He discovered that leadership was not about asserting authority alone, but about fostering cooperation, listening carefully, and embracing the strengths of others. Elinor had shown him that true partnership required humility, patience, and trust. As the weeks passed, Caleb's initial expectations of a fragile, dependent companion faded completely. Elinor had proven herself capable, intelligent, and strong. She brought skill, insight, and resilience to every task. She challenged him, supported him, and inspired him. Most importantly, she showed him that companionship was not about control or dependence, but about equality, respect, and shared effort. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Caleb reflected on the changes Elinor had brought into his life. He remembered the delicate woman he had imagined stepping off the train, someone he could guide and protect. That vision seemed distant now, almost like a dream. Elinor had stepped into his world with confidence and strength, transforming not only the ranch, but also his understanding of life, work, and partnership. In that quiet moment, Caleb realized that he had not lost anything by allowing her to take initiative. Instead, he had gained a partner, a friend, and an equal. Elinor's presence had reshaped the ranch, the work, and even himself. He had ordered a delicate companion, but life had given him something far more valuable, a woman who could stand beside him, challenge him, and share in every responsibility with courage and skill. The first storm of the season arrived suddenly, without warning, as if nature itself wanted to test the strength of the land and the people who worked it. Dark clouds rolled over the hills in the morning, the wind rising steadily, carrying with it a chill that cut through clothing and skin. By midday, rain had begun to fall, thick and relentless, turning the dirt roads to mud and drenching the wide pastures. Caleb had seen storms before, of course, but there was something different about this one. It was heavier, fiercer, and more unpredictable. He had already begun securing the livestock, checking the fences, and preparing for the worst. Alina, working alongside him, moved with the same quiet efficiency she always displayed, but Caleb noticed a new intensity in her. She was alert, focused, and unyielding, scanning the fields, checking the pens, and coordinating the ranch hands with precise commands. She had anticipated some problems before they even occurred, directing the team to reinforce weak gates, move vulnerable animals to safer areas, and stack hay in locations where it would remain dry. Despite all the preparations, trouble came quickly. One group of cattle had wandered too close to the northern creek, which was already beginning to overflow. The ground was slippery, the current stronger than usual, and several animals were struggling to maintain their footing. Caleb instinctively mounted his horse, ready to lead the rescue, but Alina was already ahead, guiding the ranch hands and assessing the situation. Her horse moved with confidence through the mud and shallow water, her posture steady even as the storm raged around them. "Caleb, we need to move quickly," she shouted over the wind. "Some of them are too close to the bank. We have to guide them back before they get swept away." He nodded, gripping the reins, and followed her lead. Together they approached the animals, their voices calm and firm, directing the herd away from danger. It was grueling work. The rain pelted their faces, soaked their clothes, and made the horses skittish. Mud clung to boots and hooves, making every step slippery. But Alina remained steady, guiding Caleb as much as she guided the animals, coordinating their movements with precision. At one point, one of the larger cattle slipped near the edge of the creek. Caleb's horse stumbled, and for a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he might fall. But Alina reacted instantly. She dismounted, planted her boots firmly in the mud, and reached out, helping to steady both man and horse. Her strength was surprising, and Caleb felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. She had not hesitated, had not faltered, and had saved him from what could have been a serious accident. The rescue took hours. Each animal needed careful attention, guidance, and sometimes physical effort to move safely. Caleb found himself working harder than he had in years, not just because of the storm, but because Alina demanded it in the best way, by example. She pushed herself without complaint, remained calm under pressure, and coordinated everyone with authority and fairness. The ranch hands, initially nervous about the storm and the dangerous conditions, followed her lead willingly, trusting her judgment completely. By the time the last animal was safe, the storm was at its peak. Rain fell in sheets, wind howled across the fields, and the ground was slippery with mud. Caleb and Alina were soaked to the bone, their clothes heavy and cold. But there was a sense of accomplishment, a quiet pride in the work they had done together. The cattle were safe, the herd intact, and the ranch hands had seen firsthand the strength, skill, and calm determination that Alina brought to every challenge. As they rode back to the barn, Caleb found himself reflecting on what had just happened. Alina had not only matched him in ability and determination, she had exceeded it in ways he could not have imagined. She had anticipated problems, taken decisive action, and remained calm under pressure. She had not only saved the cattle, but she had also saved him from harm. For the first time, Caleb realized that the partner he had always imagined, fragile, dependent, and delicate, was not what he truly needed. What he needed was someone like Alina, strong, capable, and unafraid to face challenges head-on. That night, as the storm raged on outside, Caleb and Alina worked to secure the barn and ensure the animals were comfortable. The wind rattled the wooden walls and rain poured through the gaps in the roof, but inside, they moved with quiet efficiency. Alina had already organized extra bedding, stacked hay securely, and checked every animal for injuries. Caleb assisted where needed, but he found himself relying on her judgment, trusting her instincts, and appreciating the way she approached every task with skill and thoughtfulness. By the time the storm finally began to ease in the early morning hours, both were exhausted. Mud and water clung to their boots, clothes were soaked and heavy, and muscles ached from the long hours of labor. But there was also a sense of triumph, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that they had faced a serious challenge together and come through successfully. Caleb had always prided himself on his ability to manage the ranch alone, but now he understood that success was not about working in isolation. It was about partnership, trust, and shared effort. Over the next few days, the aftermath of the storm became evident. Sections of fencing had been damaged, small areas of pasture were flooded, and a few animals were still recovering from the stress of the storm. Caleb expected to shoulder the burden alone, as he always had, but Alina insisted on helping him organize the repairs. She made lists, delegated tasks to the ranch hands, and worked tirelessly alongside them. Her presence made the recovery more efficient and effective, and Caleb found himself quietly grateful for her guidance and energy. During this period, Caleb also began to notice how Alina handled unexpected challenges with creativity and resourcefulness. When part of the northern fence had been washed away, she suggested using reinforced wood from an unused barn to patch it temporarily, saving time and preventing further damage. When a few of the cattle seemed anxious after the storm, she devised a gentle plan to calm them, moving them slowly and speaking to them in a soft, reassuring voice. Caleb had never seen such practical intelligence combined with empathy, and it impressed him deeply. Beyond the practical tasks, Alina's attitude also shaped the emotional climate of the ranch. She remained calm, composed, and optimistic even when the situation seemed overwhelming. She encouraged the ranch hands, praised their efforts, and reassured them when they felt uncertain. Her energy lifted everyone, creating a sense of unity and purpose. Caleb, who had often felt isolated in his responsibilities, began to feel a sense of connection and camaraderie he had never experienced before. The storm also revealed a new depth to Caleb and Alina's relationship. They had worked side by side through danger and difficulty, relying on each other's strengths and compensating for each other's weaknesses. Caleb had always believed that he needed to be strong for others, that his role was to protect and guide. But Alina had shown him that strength could be shared, that mutual support was more powerful than solitary effort. He began to see her not just as capable, but as indispensable. By the end of the week, the ranch had recovered, stronger and more organized than before the storm. Caleb and Alina had developed a rhythm of communication and cooperation that made the work smoother and more effective. Caleb had learned to trust her instincts, respect her judgment, and value her contributions. Alina, in turn, had gained a deeper understanding of the ranch, the animals, and Caleb himself. Their partnership had been tested, and it had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more harmonious. That spring, after the storm had passed, the land seemed renewed. The pastures were greener, the animals healthier, and the ranch itself more secure. Caleb reflected on the storm as a turning point, not just in the work of the ranch, but in his life. He had entered the experience expecting to lead, to control, to protect. Instead, he had discovered the power of partnership, the value of shared strength, and the importance of trusting someone else. Alina had challenged him, supported him, and inspired him, and he knew that life on the ranch would never be the same. Even in the quiet moments, Caleb noticed the changes. He no longer felt the need to assert authority at every turn. He listened more, observed more, and trusted Alina's judgment. He admired her not only for her physical strength and skill, but for her wisdom, calmness, and courage. She had proven herself capable of handling any challenge the ranch could present, and she had done so with patience, intelligence, and grace. Alina, too, had been transformed by the experience. The storm had tested her endurance, her skill, and her resolve. She had faced danger, guided others, and made critical decisions under pressure. Yet she had done so without hesitation, without complaint, and without losing her sense of purpose. The ranch had become more than a workplace. It had become a shared home, a space where her strengths were valued, her decisions respected, and her presence appreciated. As the sun rose one morning over the repaired fences and freshly tended fields, Caleb and Alina stood together, surveying the land. The storm was behind them, but its lessons remained. They had faced the unexpected, worked through danger, and come out stronger. They had learned to trust each other, rely on each other, and respect each other's abilities. The ranch, once a solitary endeavor for Caleb, had become a true partnership. Caleb realized with quiet clarity that Alina had brought more than skill and strength to the ranch. She had brought resilience, insight, and a perspective he had never considered. She had challenged his assumptions, expanded his understanding, and made him see that true leadership and success were not about doing everything alone. They were about collaboration, trust, and shared effort. And as the wind carried the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth across the fields, Caleb knew that the storm had changed everything. The ranch would continue to face challenges, as nature and life always would, but with a leaner by his side, he felt ready for whatever came next. She had proven herself in ways words could not capture, and he had learned that what he had once expected, a fragile, dependent companion, was far less valuable than what he had found. A woman strong, capable, and equal, a partner in every sense of the word. The storm had tested them both, but it had also united them. It had revealed the depth of Alina's strength and the capacity for Caleb to adapt, trust, and grow. From that day forward, they approached the ranch, the animals, and their lives with renewed confidence, understanding, and a sense of shared purpose. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone, and the land, once solitary and quiet, now felt alive with possibility. Spring had arrived with a gentle warmth, softening the edges of the harsh winter that had tested the ranch and its people. The fields glistened with morning dew, and the animals grazed calmly in pastures that had been repaired and strengthened after the storm. Caleb Turner stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunrise, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The work had been hard, the challenges many, but the land was thriving. More than that, Caleb himself had changed. The arrival of Alina Whitfield had transformed not only the ranch but his life. Alina moved around the yard with ease, checking the water troughs and feeding the chickens. Her movements were confident, deliberate, and efficient, yet there was a warmth in the way she spoke to the animals and the ranch hands alike. She paused to smile at a calf that nuzzled her hand and whispered a gentle word to calm it. Caleb watched her, noticing details he had never truly appreciated before. The way her eyes lit up when she solved a problem, the patience in her voice, and the strength in her hands that could both guide and soothe. The partnership they had formed over the months had become second nature. Work on the ranch no longer felt like a solitary struggle for Caleb. He had learned to rely on Alina, to respect her judgment, and to appreciate her insight. She was not a helper in the way he had imagined a delicate bride might be. She was a true partner, sharing responsibilities, making decisions, and contributing ideas that improved every aspect of the ranch. Their relationship had grown into a bond built on trust, respect, and admiration. One morning, as they walked together to inspect the fences along the eastern pasture, Caleb reflected on how far they had come. A year ago, he had expected a fragile, dependent companion who would need his guidance and protection. Instead, he had found someone strong, independent, and capable, someone who had reshaped the ranch and his life in ways he could never have imagined. Alina had taught him that true partnership was about equality, not control, about shared effort, and about valuing the strengths of another person as much as one's own. "Look at this section," Alina said, pointing to a repaired fence. "I think the posts are solid, but the gate could use a little reinforcement. We don't want a repeat of last winter." Caleb nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "Let's fix it before it becomes a problem." They worked together seamlessly, communicating with a few words, anticipating each other's movements. It was a dance of efficiency and understanding born of months of shared effort, a silent agreement that they were stronger together than apart. As they worked, Caleb found himself smiling more freely, laughing more often, and feeling a sense of peace that had been absent from his life for years. The ranch hands noticed the change in both of them. Where Caleb had once been the sole authority, now decisions were discussed, considered, and often guided by Alina's input. The workers respected the new balance of leadership, recognizing the wisdom in her approach and the benefit it brought to the ranch. They followed her guidance willingly, not because they had to, but because they trusted her judgment and admired her skill. Beyond the work, life on the ranch had become richer and more fulfilling. Evenings were no longer quiet and lonely. Caleb and Alina shared meals together, discussing the day's events, planning for the future, and occasionally laughing over small mishaps or surprises. They found joy in simple things, tending the garden, observing the animals, or watching the sun set over the hills. Their companionship had deepened into something far more meaningful than Caleb had anticipated when he had imagined a gentle, dependent wife. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher came by to discuss a shared pasture boundary. He commented on the improvements he had seen over the past months. "I don't know how you did it," he said to Caleb, "but this place has turned around. Whoever is helping you must be something special." Caleb glanced at Alina, who stood with her hands on her hips, smiling modestly. He realized, with a quiet pride, that she had been instrumental in every success the ranch had experienced. Her strength, intelligence, and care had reshaped not only the land, but also the lives of everyone who worked there. He felt gratitude and admiration, but also a deeper understanding. She had not come to the ranch needing him. She had come to share in life, work, and responsibility as an equal. The seasons passed, each bringing its own challenges and rewards. Summer heat tested the fields and the animals, but Caleb and Alina approached every problem together. They monitored water supplies, tended the crops, and ensured the livestock were healthy and strong. Autumn brought the harvest, a time of labor and planning, where every action required coordination and careful thought. Throughout it all, their partnership proved resilient. They complemented each other's skills, supported one another, and faced every obstacle with determination and cooperation. Caleb reflected on how much he had learned from Alina. He had always believed that he needed to be the protector, the one in control, the one who ensured everything ran smoothly. Alina had shown him a different kind of strength, one that came from collaboration, trust, and shared responsibility. She had challenged his assumptions, expanded his perspective, and made him see that leadership and success were not about doing everything alone. They were about working together, valuing each other's strengths, and trusting that shared effort could achieve more than solitary work ever could. Their evenings often ended quietly, sitting on the porch together, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They spoke of the day, shared ideas, and sometimes simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch. The lowing of cattle, the rustle of the wind through the trees, the distant call of birds returning to their nests. These moments, simple and unremarkable to an outsider, were profound to Caleb. He had learned that life's value was not only in accomplishment, but also in companionship, trust, and shared experience. Alina, too, had grown into her role. She had adapted to the rhythm of ranch life while leaving her own mark on it. She had introduced better methods for caring for the animals, more efficient ways to organize the fields, and a sense of calm leadership that influenced everyone around her. She had proven her resilience, intelligence, and courage, earning the respect and admiration of everyone who worked with her. The ranch was not just a place of work. It had become a home where her strengths were valued, her decisions respected, and her presence cherished. One morning, as they prepared to ride out to inspect the pastures, Caleb took a moment to reflect. He remembered the day Alina had stepped off the train, strong, confident, and capable. He remembered the storm, the challenges, and the moments when he had realized that she was not what he had imagined. And he understood with a quiet clarity that life had delivered something far greater than he had expected. He had not received a fragile companion to guide or protect. He had received a partner, an equal, and a source of strength he had never anticipated. Their work continued, but now it was filled with a sense of purpose and fulfillment that Caleb had never experienced alone. He and Alina planned for the future together, improvements to the ranch, care for the animals, and even dreams beyond the land itself. They discussed possibilities, shared responsibilities, and supported one another in every decision. The ranch was thriving, but more importantly, their relationship had grown into something lasting, meaningful, and deeply rewarding. By the time the next season arrived, Caleb realized that the ranch, once a place of solitary labor and quiet hardship, had become a living testament to partnership. Alina's presence had transformed it, not by replacing him, but by complementing him. She had brought strength, insight, and compassion, creating a balance that allowed both of them to thrive. The land flourished, the animals prospered, and the community around them recognized the change. People spoke not of a rancher with a fragile bride, but of a couple who had built something strong, enduring, and extraordinary together. One evening, after a long day of work, Caleb and Alina sat by the fire in the main room of the house. The warmth of the flames, the quiet hum of the animals outside, and the comfort of shared accomplishment made the moment feel timeless. Caleb looked at Alina, noticing the way her hair caught the firelight, the quiet confidence in her posture, and the warmth in her eyes. He felt a deep gratitude not just for her presence, but for everything she had brought into his life. "You've changed everything here," he said softly. Alina smiled, a gentle expression of pride and contentment. We've changed it together, she replied. Caleb nodded. He understood that she was right. Their life on the ranch, their partnership, and even the man he had become were all the result of shared effort, trust, and respect. He had not received what he had expected, but what he had received was far greater. A companion, a partner, and a friend who could face life's challenges with him. Not behind him, not dependent on him, but standing side by side. As the years passed, the ranch continued to thrive. Caleb and Alina faced storms, challenges, and unexpected hardships, but they faced them together. Their partnership deepened, strengthened by experience, mutual respect, and shared responsibility. They built a life filled with purpose, joy, and quiet satisfaction, a life that neither could have achieved alone. In the end, Caleb understood a simple truth. What he had ordered was never what he truly needed. He had asked for delicacy, gentleness, and dependence. Life, however, had delivered strength, courage, and partnership. Alina had brought balance, wisdom, and resilience, and together they had created something enduring. The ranch was thriving, the animals healthy, and the home alive with warmth. But more than that, Caleb had discovered the value of true partnership, the importance of shared effort, and the joy of a life built together.